Good day everyone! Today we're going to show you some different anatomical movements. But before that, what is anatomical movement? So, an anatomical movement means that act or instance of moving the bodily structure or as the change of position in one or more of the joints of the body. Joint actions are described in relation to the anatomical position, which is the universal starting position for describing movement. All terms are based on the body being in the anatomical position, which is standing erect, arms at the sides, with face palms and feet facing forward. Anatomical movements include flexion and extension, medial and lateral pronation, abduction and adduction, elevation and depression, provation and supination, dorsiflexion and plantar flexion, and the last one is circumduction.
So what is flexion? Flexion is the decrease of the angle between two structures as they bend or move closer together. On the other hand, the extension is the increase of the angle between two structures as they straighten or move further apart. So, let's take a look at some example of flexion and extension. So what is elbow or what they call the forearm flexion? It occurs when an angle between forearm and the arm decreases, allowing the ulna to move towards or closer to the humerus bone. For the shoulder or arm flexion, it occurs when an angle between the humerus of the arm and scapula bone decreases as arms move anteriorly. The shoulder or the arm extension. It is when an angle at the humerus of arm and scapula bone increases, causing the arm to move posteriorly, and the joint here allows the posterior movement past the anatomical position. Here's another example of flexion and extension. Imagine that there's a line in the sagittal plane, splitting the right and the left halves evenly. This is the midline. The medial means towards the midline, while the lateral means away from the midline.
Abduction and adduction. Yung abduction po is the movement away from the midline.
And let the name help you out. From the word abduct, in abduction, when you hear in the news that student was abducted, then it means that someone took them away. And that's exactly what's going on in this movement. The structure is being moved away from the midline reference point.
And adduction, the movement towards the midline. So imagine there is a midline here. So, yung abduction po is the movement away, and the adduction is the movement towards the midline. So, abduction, and this is the adduction.
Here is another example of abduction and adduction. So this is our midline. So abduction, the movements away from the midline, and adduction, movements towards the midline. Abduction, adduction. So as simple as that.
The elevation refers to lifting, and the depression refers to lowering. These movements only occur in several regions of the body and are a result of movement along the coronal plane. Here is the example of elevation and depression of the mouth. Here's another example of elevation and depression of shoulder in our body. Now, supination and supination. These are special movements involving rotation of the forearm. Now, the forearm consists of two bones. You have the radius, which is on the lateral side of the forearm in the anatomical position, and you also have the ulna, which is on the medial side in the anatomical position. Pay attention to the thumb. Because when you look at the thumb, and if you imagine there's a midline going on the body, watch the thumb, and as it's rotating away from the midline of the body, that is supination. In contrast is the opposite movement, the pronation. So, medial means towards the midline of the body. So now we're going to see those thumbs towards the body's midline. The supination and pronation of the foot are terms used to describe the mechanics of how you stand, you walk, and run. The dorsiflexion and plantar flexion. These are special movements involving the foot and ankle joint. Now, to help you understand this movement, let's break down the words. The dorsal refers to the back or upper side of something. Para madali niyo matandaan, let's talk about the dolphins. The dorsal fin ng dolphin is on its back side or upper side of a surface. For example, let's say na yung kuko natin ay nasa dorsal side ng ating paa, kung saan makikita natin na ang kuko natin ay nasa taas. In contrast, the plantar flexion refers to the bottom of the foot, and the flexion in anatomy is the movement that decreases the angle between two structures. During dorsiflexion, the back of upper side of the foot moves towards the shin, decreasing the angle between these two surfaces, leaving the toes pointing a little closer to the head. During plantar flexion, the bottom of the foot moves towards the calf, decreasing the angle to those two surfaces, leaving the toes pointing away from the body. Circumduction is an angular movement that blends the motions of flexion, abduction, extension, and adduction to create a circular or conical motion. The circumduction starts with the exact same letters as the word circle, so that it will tip you off that this movement is going to create that circular or conical movement at the joint. Looking at the shoulder joint, we'll start with arm, flexion, abduction, extension, and adduction. And when you combine these movements into a smooth motion, we can see how it forms a circle. At kung nahihirapan kayo sa pag-memorize ng specific order ng movement ng circumduction, you can remember or you can use the mnemonic Fabea. The mnemonic for movements Fabea: F for flexion, AB for abduction, E for extension, and A for adduction. Now, saan nangyayari ang ating circumduction? Generally speaking, ang circumduction ay combination of flexion, abduction, extension, and adduction. So, ang circumduction nag-o-occur siya sa mga joints sa ating katawan na nag-aalam ng mga ganitong movements. It can occur in our hips, our thigh, in our shoulder or our joint, in our arm, in our wrist, in our thumb and fingers. Also, it can occur in our foot or ankle and toes. Also, in our head. The rotation is a body movement term that describes a bone moving around the circle axis. The rotation can occur at the head, vertebral column, upper and lower limbs. The movement away from the body's midline in our arm is called the lateral external rotation of arm, while towards the body's midline of our arm is called the medial